After a few iffy attempts at making my own coffee syrups, I decided to switch gears and go for coffee creamers instead. So if you're looking for some delicious holiday creamers that you can add to your coffee this season, then I've got the perfect solutions for you here. These are my holiday coffee creamers: pumpkin spice, peppermint mocha, and gingerbread. Perfect for the holiday season, or honestly, any time of the year. So if you'd like to see how these are made, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is not just one of mine, not just two of mine. As you saw from the thumbnail, it's actually three of mine. Now, as many of you probably know, I've been playing around with trying to make my own coffee syrups, sugar-free syrups, you know, those flavored syrups you add to coffee, to oatmeal, to whatever. I've had some sketchy kind of results from that, and it occurred to me that perhaps instead of the syrups, I should be working on some creamers. You can use them in the exact same way. I add them to coffee, I add them to cereal, like my Cheerios. I'll add a little bit to add some flavor and sweetness. You can use these just as you would coffee syrups for the most part. But I've got three of them and they are all holiday flavored. I'm going to start off in the fall and we're going to move into winter. So the first one that I'm going to be working on is my pumpkin spice creamer. Now this is just in time for Thanksgiving, but honestly, I'll use this stuff all year long. I don't need some season telling me what I should be eating. Now I'm going to make each creamer its own little segment, meaning that I'm going to show you the ingredients, I'm going to make it, and then give you the nutrition facts for each one. So there'll be chapters down in the description box for the pumpkin spice, for the peppermint mocha, and for the gingerbread. So let's go over the ingredients for the pumpkin spice creamer. I have here 3.5 cups of almond milk. Now you don't have to use almond milk if you prefer something else. You go right ahead and use that. You could even use full fat milk if you wanted, but I'm trying to keep the bites and points and calories pretty low. Here I have 3/4 cup of brown sugar replacement. Now in the recipe of each of these, it is going to say you can use between a 1/2 cup to a full cup. I prefer going somewhere in the middle. If you like your creamer a little sweeter, you can go more towards 1 cup. If you like it a little less sweet, go to a 1/2 cup. Now if the first time you make it, it's not quite sweet enough for your taste, go ahead and add a little sweetener to your coffee. That's what I do if I find it's just a little under what I want for sweetness. But you can play around with the sweetness level of this and find what works for you. Here I have 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree, and that's pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie mix. Make sure that you don't pick that up. They can sometimes be next to each other in the supermarket, so just make sure you want plain, pure pumpkin puree. Here I have 1.5 tablespoons of pumpkin pie spice. Now I make my own pumpkin pie spice, but if you want to get the stuff in the store, that's fine. But I generally make my own. In fact, the gingerbread spice is also my own. Now I did a video quite a while ago and I will card that here, and it shows how I do 4 holiday spice blends. I do poultry seasoning, pumpkin pie spice, apple pie spice, and gingerbread spice. So if you're looking for any of those, can't find them in the store, or you want to make your own, you'll check out that video. And here I have 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and that's just to give us a little of that vanilla flavor that you might get in a pumpkin pie in the background. Now those are all the ingredients. Each of these recipes is only 5 ingredients, so there's not too much that you have to work with. But I have my pot over here on medium heat. You're gonna start it off at medium, especially for this one and the gingerbread. We're gonna start off by heating up the spice blend and getting those flavors activated with some heat. You're also gonna want to have a fine mesh strainer because we are going to strain this at the end. You don't have to do that, and I'll explain that in a moment, but I use it because the pumpkin pulp and the pumpkin spice mix can sometimes settle in the bottom of your cup when you've poured it out, and I don't like that residue. If it doesn't bother you, then you don't have to strain it. But I prefer straining it to make this as smooth as possible. Now, each of these recipes is going to be slightly different in how you proceed based on the ingredients. For this one, as I said, we're going to start off with the pumpkin pie spice blend. Just going to put that in my hot saucepan and just whisk that around. Keep whisking. You're just heating this through just enough to get those scents in the air, and I'm already smelling them. It's only about 30 seconds. Next, we're gonna add in our pumpkin puree and whisk that all together, getting those two combined so that you're infusing the pumpkin with the pumpkin pie flavoring, because honestly, to me, pumpkin doesn't really have a lot of flavor on its own. It's really the spices that make that reminiscent pumpkin pie flavor. So we're just gonna whisk this for 1 minute. Next, we're going to add in our brown sugar replacement, and we're going to whisk that in to get that all broken up and melted into our pumpkin. Now you'll see as the sugar melts, it takes on a more liquid appearance. And this is one of the other reasons I do like to use the fine mesh strainer, because sometimes brown sugar replacement doesn't always melt down perfectly. There might be a clump or two, but rather than having that interfere with your coffee enjoyment, I'd rather strain it in case there is anything like that in there. But just break up any clumps that you do see with your whisk and get as much of that fully incorporated as you can. You can also come in with a spatula and start pressing down on any clumps that you find in case the whisk is not quite breaking them up for you. And that just takes another minute. So now what we're going to do is just whisk in our milk. Get all of that poured in and whisk until all of this comes together. Now what we're going to do is turn this up to medium high because we want to start this coming up to a boil. You don't want it to be like a full rolling boil. You're just looking for it to start bubbling and give a low boil, they call it. I'll show you what it looks like. But while this is heating up, we're just going to come in and periodically whisk it around just to make sure things aren't sitting in one spot for too long. So I'll heat this up to a low boil. You can see it's starting to boil. That's what I consider a low boil. So now we're going to turn this down to medium, and we're going to let this cook for about 2 minutes, whisking it frequently. Now, I did fail to mention when I was talking about the brown sugar replacement, if you don't have it, you can't find it, you could use white sugar, the granulated sugar replacement. I find that the brown sugar fits better with the pumpkin pie spice flavoring, but if all you have is the white granulated, that's fine. You could also substitute maple syrup, sugar-free maple syrup, the same amount, and use that instead. Okay, so that looks good right there. I'm going to turn off the heat, and then I'm going to whisk in the vanilla. You want to add vanilla or any sort of extracts at the end because they are alcohol-based. If you add them too soon, all of that flavor just drifts off into the air from being heated. So you want to always add extracts at the end if you're cooking something on the stovetop. All right, so that looks good there. Now what I would normally do is let this sit and cool in the pan before I move it over and put it through the strainer, but I've got 2 other ones to make, so we're gonna move ahead a little more quickly than I would. But normally I would just cool this first and then take it out and strain it. But for now, I'm going to take it, I have a strainer on over my 4-cup measuring cup, and I'm just gonna pour that in And I'm going to take my whisk and just gently move things around to let the liquid pass through. As I said, we're getting rid of any residue that we might not want in the bottom of our coffee cup. But again, if that's not going to bother you, then just don't worry about this step. And now you can see the residue that is left behind. That is stuff we do not want, but we can take some of the liquid that is stuck on the bottom and add that in. So then I'm going to take a jar with a funnel, and I'm just going to carefully transfer this in to my jar here. As you saw, this was made about 4 cups. Now I'm going to let this cool down completely before I put the lid on it. This is going to make, for me, 8 servings. And that is another thing that I do mention in the recipe. You may get more, you may get less. It depends on how much creamer you want to use. I generally use about 1/3 to 1/2 cup, and that gives me just the right flavor, just the right sweetness for me. But you can use whatever amount that you want, whatever you like in your coffee, whatever is going to get you the flavor and sweetness that you enjoy. But for me, this is going to be 8 servings. Now, each of those servings of the pumpkin spice creamer is going to be 0 bites, 0 blue points. I'm on the Healthy Better Balance plan, which is equivalent to the old WW Blue plan, which is around where their current plan is now. So those are the bites and points that I give. Now, if you're following calories, the calories for 1 serving would be 22. And if you are following macros, the fat would be 1.4 grams. Saturated fat would be 0 grams. Protein would be 0.6 grams. Carbs would be 20.6 grams. Fiber would be 1.2 grams. And sugars would be 0.5 grams for 1/8 of this, which is about 1/2 cup. As I said, you use less, you use more, you use whatever you need to, but those are what I'm getting for the amount of sweetener that I added, as well as the amount that I typically use. All right, so that's our pumpkin spice. I'm gonna move that aside and let that cool before I seal it, and I'll be back in a moment with Peppermint Mocha. Okay, for our Peppermint Mocha creamer, we're going to be using 3.5 cups of almond milk again. As I said, each of these is going to start with the same amount of almond milk. Here I have 3/4 cup of sugar replacement. That's granulated sugar replacement. In this recipe, we don't want anything competing with our Peppermint Mocha flavor. So we want something that's going to give us sweetness, but no extra flavor. Here I have 2/3 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. Now I'm using black cocoa powder that my friend Judy gave me last year, but you can use regular cocoa powder as long as it's unsweetened. You don't want to be using hot cocoa mix. That's not what we're going for. This is unsweetened cocoa powder. Here I have 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 1 tablespoon of peppermint extract. We need a lot of the peppermint extract, but we're also using a little bit of the vanilla extract to kind of tone it down slightly, but still give us big peppermint flavor. All right, so this one's gonna start a little bit differently than the last one did, and a little bit differently than the next one will be. This time we are starting off with our almond milk. I'm gonna add that to my pot, and I have my saucepan over medium heat. I wanna get this so that it's warm enough and starts to steam slightly before we move on with adding any of the other ingredients. Speaking of adding the ingredients, we're going to need a sieve, a fine mesh sieve again. This time we're going to put the cocoa powder through there as we add it to the saucepan, because cocoa powder can clump quite a bit. And this will actually save us a step in having to strain it later. I typically don't strain this one at the end, simply because the cocoa usually disperses enough in here, and even if there is a little residual, it typically melts down in your coffee. But I haven't had any problems where I needed to sieve this afterwards. Once I've sieved the cocoa powder to get it in there, it's fine. Now, another thing I did want to mention, you can see that there's no coffee flavor, and that is because we are adding it to coffee. If you're not going to be adding it to coffee and you want a mocha flavor rather than just a peppermint cocoa flavor, then you would add a tablespoon of instant coffee to this and just add it to your oatmeal, to your cereal, or whatever else you want. But because we're adding it into the coffee, I don't feel it's necessary. But you could still add it here, even if you are adding it to coffee and you just want to bump up that coffee flavor a little bit more. I don't find it necessary, but you may enjoy it that way, so feel free to add the tablespoon of instant coffee if you wish. But I'm going to wait for this almond milk to start to steam. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that the milk is starting to steam right now. And you may have also noticed that the plant and the pumpkin are no longer in the way. I noticed they were blocking my sign back there, and we can't have that. I also didn't want it blocking the pot. Now what we're going to do is whisk in our sugar replacement and just get that incorporated, and then put our cocoa into our sieve and get that in. And I'm going to be using a spoon, kind of like those old sifters that you used to see, that you'd turn the little crank and it would have a little whisk that would move it through. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're just passing this through and making sure we get rid of any clumps in our cocoa, so that way it's easier to blend in. And you can see that it has some little clumps in there. That it's a good thing we're getting rid of those, because that'll make this much easier to incorporate. So set that aside. Now we're going to whisk that cocoa in, and this will be a little darker than most. As I said, this is black cocoa, which is kind of like Dutch processed cocoa, which takes a little bit of the bitterness out, but black cocoa is even more refined, so there's even less bitterness. But again, you use whatever kind of unsweetened cocoa powder you want. Any one will work. All right, so now that's all incorporated. Now we're going to do the same thing. We are going to let this come up to a low boil, and then we're going to reduce the heat down to medium. But we will keep whisking periodically as this comes up to temperature. Okay, so we're getting our boil there, and I'm going to turn this down to medium. And again, we're going to let this cook for 2 minutes. Now with this one in particular, you may want to add a little more sweetener to this to balance out the cocoa. I find 3/4 cup is sufficient. And if I don't, as I said, I can just add a little more sweetener when I add it to my coffee. As I said, you do it to your liking, whether you like it sweeter, less sweet, what have you. I'm using 3/4 cup of sweetener in each of these. That way I have nutrition facts that are set so that you know that's 3/4 cup, and you can go up or down from there. Just whisk this periodically while it's cooking for those 2 minutes. Okay, so it's been 2 minutes. I'm going to turn off the heat just like last time and add in the vanilla and the peppermint extracts. Don't stand over the pot directly when you add that peppermint in, because that really hits you. It's kind of like when you put that Vicks Vapor Rub on, it'll definitely clear you out. But you just want to whisk those 2 extracts in here, and we're done. So as I said, I would normally let this cool completely in the pan, but I can't do that today because we are making another one after this. So I'm going to try to carefully add this into my mason jar here. And now we're going to let this cool completely in the jar before we seal it. Again, we don't want to seal it while it's still warm. We want to let this cool down completely. But while we're doing that, let's go over the nutrition facts. This is going to make 8 servings again. It's about 1/2 cup per serving. And each of these is going to be 1 Better Balanced Bite or Old Blue Point. Now, if you were following calories, the calories for 1 serving would be 35. And if you were following macros, the fat is 2.3 grams. Saturated fat is 0.6 grams. Protein is 1.9 grams. Carbs are 22.6 grams. Fiber is 2.8 grams. And sugars are 0.4 grams for 1/8 of this, which is about, as I said, 1/2 cup. Again, you can use more, you can use less, you can use whatever your preference is, but those are the nutrition facts as I'm giving them, as I usually make this. All right, so let me set this one aside, clean up a few things, and we'll move on to our final creamer, gingerbread. Okay, so for our final creamer, what we are going to be doing is gingerbread spice. Perfect for the upcoming holidays. Honestly, perfect any time of the year as far as I'm concerned. We are going to start off once again with 3.5 cups of almond milk, and again, use whatever milk you prefer. Here I have 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar replacement. Now you want brown sugar replacement if you can find it. Now if you can't, you can use granulated, although it will kind of dull the molassesy flavor of the gingerbread. And molasses and the spices are really what gives gingerbread its flavor. So that's why I want to use the brown sugar replacement, because it'll give us some of those molasses notes without adding a lot of molasses and a lot of calories, bites, and points. But if you really can't find it, I would use some sugar-free maple syrup instead of the granulated, but whatever you happen to have on hand, you can manage with. Here I have 2 tablespoons of molasses, and as I said, that's one of the dominant flavors of gingerbread. So I needed to have some in there, but I didn't want to have too much to add to the bites, points, and calories. Here I have 1.5 tablespoons of gingerbread spice, and as I said, I have a recipe for gingerbread spice blend. You can sometimes find it in the store, but it's very rare that I've seen it, so you may likely have to have your own mix. If not, I do have in the recipe what you would use as a replacement, just standard things like cinnamon, ginger, cloves, etc. So there is a way to do it with just those individual spices if you didn't want to make up any of the gingerbread spice blend. But as I said, I did do the holiday spice blends before in a video. I'll link that down below. And here I have 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. That's just to help to mellow some of the flavors and kind of help combine everything together. All right, so again, I have my saucepan over a medium heat, and we are going to start off as we did with the pumpkin with our gingerbread spice. Gonna add that in and just start whisking that around just for about 30 seconds or so, just to get those flavors to wake up. You could skip this step, but I really do think it enhances the flavor. Add in brown sugar replacement and molasses and just whisk that all together. We're going to get those spices mixed in with our sweetener and get all of those flavors melting. Definitely getting a big hit of the molasses scent, and that's exactly what you're looking for in the gingerbread. We're just gonna let this cook for about a minute just to get all those flavors to melt. All right, so all of that is combined. I'm going to add in my almond milk and whisk that in to get one homogeneous color. So now I'm going to turn this up to medium high again just to bring it up to a low boil. Then we're going to bring it down to medium once again. All right, so we are at that low boil point, so I'm going to turn that down to medium and just keep whisking this on occasion for the next 2 minutes. All right, it's been 2 minutes. I'm going to turn off the heat and add in our vanilla extract and whisk that through. And now what we're going to do is strain it just as we did with the pumpkin spice, because all of those spices could leave some residue that I'm not fond of. Again, if it doesn't bother you, you can skip this step, but I like straining it just to make sure that none of those spices are gonna leave a residue. And you can see here what I'm talking about. This is what would be left behind and cause a residue at the bottom of my cup, and I don't want that. So that's over there. Now I'm going to try to carefully add this into my container here. I'm going to pour this slowly to try to keep as much of that for my coffee and as little as I can get onto the counter. And there we have it, our gingerbread creamer. This is so good. I absolutely love it. I love each one of these. And this will make 8 servings, as I said, about 1/2 cup a serving. And that's just the way I like it. You do it the way you want to do it. But for the way I'm doing it, this is going to be one Better Balanced by Earl Blue Point, and that's mostly because of the molasses. If we didn't need the molasses, we could have probably brought that down to 0. but it's worth having that molasses in there. Now, if you are following calories, the calories for each serving would be 34. And if you are following macros, the fat would be 1.3 grams. Saturated fat would be 0 grams. Protein would be 0.5 grams. Carbs would be 23.2 grams. Fiber would be 0.7 grams. And sugars would be 3.4 grams for 1/8 of this creamer. But that's all there is to it. 3 delicious, easy creamers that you can add to your coffee, to your cereal, to your oatmeal, whatever you like. But I hope that you enjoyed these recipes and this video, and if you did, I'd appreciate the usual like, subscribe, comment, share, hit that notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. And comment down below, which of these do you think would be your favorite? Now, these will keep for about 2 weeks or so in the fridge, well sealed in a container, as I'm doing in my mason jars, and it's a good idea to shake it each time before you use it, just in case anything has started to settle a little bit. Just give it a good shake. Now, the recipes for these will be on the blog. I will link directly to that down below. It will all be in one recipe under the heading of 3 holiday coffee creamers, and they will be listed there in the order that I made them here: the pumpkin spice, the peppermint mocha, and the gingerbread. And while you're down there, check out that description box for all sorts of information, including my social media, my stores, what have you. Now I'm gonna let these cool down before I seal them, or maybe I'll make myself a quick cup of coffee. Just what flavor will I use? Choices, choices. I hope you're going to be dealing with this choice yourself very soon. And until next time, bye.